home, everyone.
Welcome, citizens. Exceptional Radio.
Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.
Good afternoon. It's Sunday, the 12th of July, 2020, and we've got a bunch of interesting stuff going on in the media here. It seems that there are a lot of schools that are trying to reopen, and we've got on top of that amusement parks are being declared safe, and we just got some confusing times going on, and I think that it's important that we acknowledge that there's a lot more complex economics at work here when we try to discuss things like opening schools and getting kids back into school, and what does that even mean, really? So we just had a brief screening of I think it's a parody of a Disney Welcome Home video. And the thing that stuck out to me the most, other than the fact that it might not be real, is that at the end there's a stormtrooper that says "Welcome, citizen," and I thought that was like a really, kind of messed up foreshadowing.
Yeah, that whole thing, I think that was one of the reasons she left it in when she edited it that way, because that was originally part of it. The Disney people that was like actually part of their original ad, but the one with the interspersed hospital stuff was the parody, obviously.
Well, yeah.
But yeah, the stormtrooper part was not added. That was part of the original ad, and that's like the fact that somebody at Disney thought that was okay to put a stormtrooper security guard at the end is just, we're in obviously the most dystopian but least self-aware universe right now. Like how unaware of yourself can you be?
It just struck me as so surreal. Like, a stormtrooper? Does that mean that stormtroopers are going to become park security now?
I mean, that's what they made it look like. Obviously, that's not the case, but that's what it, like, the way they're edit on the original video, that's what it kind of looks like. And it's just this level of absurdity where, again, the people who are doing the marketing and putting out the advertisements are just so far away from reality that they don't understand how ridiculous that commercial was. It was just an absurd commercial.
Yeah.
Well, Disney hasn't even, with the union that represents performers at Disney parks, and specifically the ones at Disney World, Disney and the union may still be in disagreement about providing COVID-19 testing to the performers, and the performers actually did not want to return to work because Disney was maintaining that regular testing would provide a false sense of security, and that instead they're going to emphasize wearing masks and social distancing. So it may even be a stretch to say that somebody going to the park would even see, anybody in a stormtrooper outfit who would actually be a performer. So maybe it's just some foreshadowing that park security is going to be like some heavily masked, super covered up personnel that just kind of walk around, or even people that are walking around looking like stormtroopers but aren't.
It just makes me think of like Westworld and Future World and whatever, Shogun World and all that stuff. Eventually it just falls apart. no matter how good they do it, no matter how immersive the experience is, at some point, we've just exposed this kind of dark reality of Disney here. Stormtroopers saying "Welcome, citizen." Does that mean that there are non-citizens that won't get the same kind of welcome treatment?
Oh yeah, definitely the people who can't afford the however many hundreds of dollars ticket entry it is. Because then you have to realize, because of their quarantining, I doubt you can just go to Disney World or for whatever for like a day. If you're going in, you probably have to agree to go there for like 7 days or some shit, so they can quarantine people. Like the way that they're gonna do it, there's gonna be some caveats to it that it's only gonna end up being like rich people that actually end up getting to enjoy it. I would assume, because part of it is like, even think about the travel to get there. The whole airline process has been very much made more difficult to get through, and the only people that are really trying to brave that shit are somebody with the clear pass or with the TSA pre-check who can just skip over the bullshit. And that's like, if people are traveling right now, it's for seeing their families, not to go to Disney World, unless they're just rich enough to do it. And that's, again, this is like, yeah, the citizen. Yeah, you buy that citizenship.
Well, I can only imagine how big of a dent in their revenue stream that losing out on the day pass is going to have. Or fuck, if they just say fuck it and they let people buy day passes without any kind of quarantine measures, and that just tells us a lot more about the kind of leadership that exists at Disneyland, of all places, or Disney World, or Disney International, whatever they are. And this is no different than the restaurants opening up early, in my opinion. This is just another cash grab, and fuck, Disney doesn't need that money. They can probably subsist off of their movie revenue. They do own the MCU, right? It's like,
right.
It's not like they're hurting for cash.
Well, I think what ends up happening is, now that you have this culture of perpetual gains and infinite growth, even though they have however many billions of dollars that they're sitting on, their boardroom will not be happy if they take a quarter off, even a week off. So this culture of profit, regardless of what is happening in the world, is obviously hitting a point of diminishing returns, as to where everyone is looking at Disney right now saying, what the fuck are you thinking? Nobody in their right mind is looking at Disney, clapping their hands and applauding Disney for right now. This is a completely idiotic decision. It's 100% about money. And the fact that they're trying to, the advertisements in the past few weeks that are trying to talk about opening back up while also avoid talking about COVID are gross. There's going to be whole classes discussing advertisers who try to avoid talking about a pandemic in the middle of a pandemic to sell a product to someone who didn't need that product, and also try to make that person feel like they needed that product in the middle of a fucking pandemic. There's going to be whole segments of universities dedicated to breaking this shit down. But we're in the middle of it right now, and capitalism wants to let people think this shit is just hunky-dory.
Well, they want to... What's the number? Only 2% of kids are going to die, and there's something like 58 million children who are enrolled in schools in this country, and so 2% of that is... it's a lot. That's like 1 million kids, right? Something like that.
What was it, 2%?
It's like 2% of 58 million.
Yeah, so that's about 1 million kids, yeah.
So 1 million kids are going to die.
Yeah.
That's,
for the sake of making sure they get... And, I think we need to discuss this.
So that's like...
The whole, we've discussed the education industrial complex that is also the prison industrial pipeline, school to jail to prison. So what's happening right now, I think, is you can't have that pipeline if kids aren't in physical school. Because what is happening is I think people are realizing that their kids are constantly not with them. They're constantly stressed out under the thumb of someone else. And right now, they've been able to survive without either one of those. And a lot of people are saying, wait, so if I can survive this long without either one of those, let's see if I can go longer. And the government's like, nope, we need your kids back. We need to indoctrinate them. We need to do that Pavlovian bell shit and have them responding to bells every fucking 45 minutes. Because otherwise, we can't figure out how to keep them going to jail and putting them in prison and getting them addicted to drugs and getting them to prostitute themselves because we have taken them away from their families and have destroyed their family units. But now that the family unit's reconstituting, we need to break that shit up immediately. That's what that shit looks like to me. I don't know about anybody else, but that's what that shit feels like to me, because there's no other reason to try to rush these kids back to school when they could pay, if they're worried, like if the right wing is as worried about their family unit as they say, they could be paying moms, or because they don't like a dad in the home. So let's just say they could be paying moms to stay home and teach their kids, but they also don't like women in authority roles either. So it's like they don't want that shit. We could have an entire generation of Americans that were taken care of by their own moms, given education systems that were agreed upon unanimously by different sources, and then distributed to the moms so that they didn't have to lift a bunch of shit to be able to teach their kids, because all of the education system had worked together to make this shit accessible. Because that's what I'm like, if somebody paid me to design a system to make it accessible for kids and adults to have information and education for free, I would do that, because then I would have gotten paid for it and then they'd have access. But the problem is this system makes it so that I have to get paid for individual transactions. So rather than paying me as an entity to go take care of differently able people or elderly people, I have to charge those individuals every time I go see them, because society's like, oh, this isn't a utility, this person needs to pay for it. When in reality, if we had a social service force that was like the equivalent of a firefighter, but for a tech problem, and your grandma could just call up the tech force and be like, hey, I need to talk to my grandkid on Facebook and I can't figure this out. Somebody who had their background checked for criminal fucking history, make sure they had no criminal history, make sure these people were educated enough to go take care of your grandma. Then this person could just show up and fix your grandma's fucking computer and not have your grandma pay for it. But our society is too focused on making me get paid on individual transactions and piecemealing out my fucking work, when in reality, if I want to help that grandma, I'd rather not have that grandma pay me. I want to make sure my time is compensated, but the actual person I'm helping them because they need help. I don't want to tax that person.
So
I don't want to charge somebody 2-year-old grandma to like help them download a program that they couldn't figure out because their glasses, she needed to get her glasses fucking her prescription updated and she just can't see the fucking font. She doesn't need to pay for that shit. But society is too focused on profit, but they don't even realize people like me want to help that person just for the sake of helping them. I'd rather not have that individual person pay for that shit. Yeah. The person doing that, I don't want them to pay for that, but society keeps telling you that's what I want for me. That's not what the fuck I want, and I doubt that's what doctors want either.
Yeah, I think that's in itself is a glorious nutshell. It costs a lot of money for the system to well, who does it actually cost money when the system slows down, when the economic machine starts to roll more slowly? But then what kind of economic impact do we have when 1 million kids die, which is 333 times the number of people that died in 9/11, which we engaged in a decades-long war over? But when 1 million kids die from this because we put them back in schools, and then some significant number of teachers who are, have 1,000+ exposures a day, they also start dying. And then these kids bring it home and their grandma gets it. And then, everyone starts dying. It's one of those stories where everyone dies at the end. But at some point, there's a huge economic impact that results from all that death, especially once it gets beyond a point where a city or a community can manage that. Like, there are only so many mortuaries. There are only so many, I guess a mortuary is the place that you take people for that kind of thing. There are only so many crematoriums. There's only so much time, even in a day, for these services to be rendered. And so, eventually, all of these things will start to add up. There's a huge economic impact that occurs there, and it's considerably greater than any amount of money that a community would have to spend to ensure that students have the option for an online school that doesn't endanger them or an educator or someone's grandmother.
So there's a huge opportunity because let's say we shifted to students being online. Well, where would they get those computers if from a Chinese factory right now or like a Taiwanese factory? Well, there's an opportunity for all these car factories to remod, to build fucking computers, because nobody needs to buy a car right now. Nobody's going anywhere. So let's turn these fucking car factories into computer factories, because there's too much computer element in the car now because they want to make us dependent on the fucking dealership. So let's take all those computer parts, building machines that you have in the auto factories, for the sake of making that shit too difficult for an actual mechanical engineer to work on without a fucking computer science degree, and build actual computers now, because that's what America needs. But this country is too goddamn short-sighted that it's like it's not seeing those simple ass fucking solutions. That's a super if Elon Musk can re-outfit Tesla to build ventilators that fast, which they didn't. It was just bullshit. It wasn't going to be that fast. It was going to take a little bit longer than he said, because he's a bullshitter. Let's just say it. Let's put it out there. All these fucking people are bullshitters. I don't know why anybody ever listens to Elon Musk, because he just can't do the fucking math on what he's talking about to say he's wrong. Yet I digress. The problem is that we have too many bullshitters and not enough people to check them on their math. And that's why we need to have somebody come in and say, hey, obviously a bunch of people are trying to raise the flag on sending the kids back to school, but the parents don't have to do it. This is what it comes down to. If your kid is enrolled in a school this fall, you don't have to fucking send your kid back to school. And that's the bottom line, where we're like, if we need to have a school strike now because these fucking idiots want to kill kids, that's what the fuck we need to do, parents. I don't have a kid. I'm not going to be affected by this. My thing is, this is where I'm more concerned about the future of America right now, because if you have a bunch of parents that are willing to sacrifice their children because of some dumbass fucking tanning bed addict, like, I'm not about to sit here and like let the country get fucking sideswiped by some idiot who's like anti-immigrant, who's married to a fucking immigrant. So again, there's too many hypocrisies happening that people are just not even like addressing in critical thought, to let these fucking morons tell them how to do something with their child that they brought into this world, that they're tasked to protect from all of the threats that they brought them in. If you bring in a child into this world, it's your fucking job to protect them against the threat. And then if you have this person telling you to sacrifice your child right now, this is the equivalent of the angel of death coming and telling you to sacrifice your child, knowing damn well Yahweh's gonna be like, hey, that was a test, you failed. If you're gonna sacrifice your child because this angel told you and it wasn't me, you failed. All these people calling themselves Christian, not understanding how these tests work. If you get asked to sacrifice your child, you're not supposed to do it. It's your fucking kid. Go get a goat. Pretend the goat is your kid. That's what you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to actually kill your goddamn kid. But these people who want to worship white Jesus, not actually read their fucking Bible, then have their pastor tell them that they're better than brown people.
These are people that are cool with kids being held in cages during a pandemic.
Right. Yeah.
And from within this group, there's a
ignoring that shit.
Well, there's a percentage of this group that also believes that these children, when they disappear from the concentration camp, are being sold into slavery, into sex slaves,
But they don't care about that either. They'll talk about it. They'll use it as a conspiracy theory. What are they doing about it? Nothing.
It's insane. There's this level of like, it's like saccharine tears, I think is what they are.
Well, that's just like, did you hear about the supposed child smuggling ring that the furniture company was doing? But then one of the supposed kids that was being smuggled came forward 2 days later and was like, y'all a bunch of fucking weirdos. I was not sold into sex slavery. You're a bunch of fucking weirdos.
Furniture smuggling.
And then all the people who tried to perpetuate that conspiracy are acting like the girl didn't just put out a fucking video. I'm sure they'll be like, oh, this is fake news. This is a deep fake video.
Of course it is.
Because they keep moving the goalposts.
Oh yeah, it's always somebody who's never made a deep fake or even what's that the deep sleep video. They've never even attempted to do that on their own. Like,
right?
It's always somebody.
They don't understand the tool at all.
Yeah, they don't understand how the tool works. They don't understand like just the requirements for the data that you provide it. Yet they know that it's it's been faked or something else. There's so many complex techie buzzwords that float around and get tossed into the short-term memory lexicon of culture. And then they come and go and they come back again occasionally. Like I feel like Bitcoin has come and gone several times for the masses, but this one's just like, deep fakes are going to be around for a long time. They're not going anywhere. They're only going to get better. It presents a really complex tool, and with a very high abuse potential. But I feel like we're still kind of in a place where there's an opportunity to provide. Well, let's be real honest. The only people who are going to get really good with this are really young people at this point. But it's important that they get the kind of ethical foundations and that'll allow them to make good decisions, so they won't decide to go and do something just because, hey, there's a lot of money here, or I can be exalted within an elite group of hackers that nobody knows their name or what they look like, because they can't actually reveal who they are, because they'll go to fucking federal prison for like the rest of their lives and never be able to touch a keyboard again.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't understand those things do exist, and again, we're living in times that sound like, if you look at V for Vendetta, the film, we could be living in that very much so, except for the fact that we don't actually have any vigilantes stepping up in that manner, which I'm not calling for, but it's one of those things where it's amazing how much media makes you think that people are gonna do that vigilante shit, and in reality, the people who only act out are like these fucking racist toxoplasmosis zombies. Reality's so much more disappointing. It's like a Rob Schneider film, and like it's it gets to be. You wake up every day and you're like, did somebody do the Batman shit last night?
Nope,
not today. But at the same time, there's really no supervillains either. There's no Lex Luthors. There's no fucking Jokers. So on the one hand, there's like the people we know that we can point at society and be like, yeah, these are evil, horrible men, because they're almost always men. Like 99% of the time, yeah, they're men. Um, and then there's the Ghislaine Maxwell, whatever the fuck her name is. There's her 1% of the time, but all the other 99 is men. But even in those times, they're not.
Wait,
They're not like they're not creating black holes and destroying the fucking multiverse. That shit ain't,
that means
there's so many things where we
Jeffrey
can be
Epstein
like,
was
okay,
actually a Bond villain, though. He was the only one that had like a female counterpart in his whole crazy trafficking operation.
no, that's a very common thing.
Okay.
It's called a bottom bitch, is what that's called. She's nothing more than a bottom bitch. That's not Bond villain shit. He's like, again, the media, because so many people in the media are involved, they want to make it out to seem like it's some Bond villain shit when it's really just like, he's like a rich pimp. Bond villains have layers to them that go beyond the cinnabar region of their pelvis. Epstein was 100% driven by his pelvis. He's not a Bond villain. Like, that's where I'm like, I'm not about to give him that level of like admiration for his intelligence, because it was all about his dick. Let's not get it twisted. He just had people on the police force fucking protecting him. That's not Bond villain shit. Bond villain shit to me is like, you gotta have a base on the moon and a laser pointed at something with no intention of actually using that laser. That has nothing to do with your dick.
That's like some Kim Jong-il type stuff, though. If he had a laser,
that's why Kim Jong-il is a Bond level villain, in that he's not focused on fucking, like, you have the Thai king. COVID hits, he's holed up with 29 concubines. That's not a Bond level villain. He's just a dude who wants to fuck. He's a pitiful man. That's a pitiful man. Royal should never be used anywhere near the King of Thailand's name. He's not royal. He just happens to be a dude with a bunch of subordinates who are fearful that he'll lock them up. That's not a king.
No,
he can't walk among his people without a security guard with a bunch of fucking guns. That's not a king, bro.
That's a tyrant.
If you can't walk among your people without protection, you are not a king. You are not a leader amongst those people. I don't care what crown you have. I don't care what kind of fucking throne you sit on. You are not the king of those people.
I think
they're subjugated by you.
I think by definition,
difference.
a king would always be walking around with protection.
Those aren't kings.
No. I'm saying
articulating.
I'm saying that
those are subjugators.
No. What I mean is
an actual king.
Well, hold on, hear me out, man.
In the real sense of the word, that is not just a king by decree of law and by the spear. That's a despot. The term despot, an actual king or queen that is royal, who leads the people. We shouldn't muddle those terms, because then we end up having people like the quote-unquote king of Thailand who's sitting in the fucking room with his concubines while his fucking people are at risk. That's not a king.
No, dude.
We can't call that a king.
I think a king is always...
That's not a king.
A king would always be walking around protected, because he would be so beloved by his people that they would protect his ass if something horrible just happened. That's what I mean. Like, they're always protected in the sense that their citizens aren't out to get them.
Most definitely.
They've achieved a level of leadership and solidarity and unity within their community, their kingdom, all the lands that they're under their protection, whatever, because they're genuinely a good person. I don't think that we have those. I think that's like that doesn't exist in Western culture.
I don't think it's existed for a while.
If it ever has existed.
Yeah, there's always been an element of decree. There's always been an element of divine anointment. There's always been
divine anointment.
Some military backing, some type of coup, some type of way to sway the people. I mean, some of the the Judean kings, some of them were considered um, divinely directed to fill that station, and there were prophets at the time that would say that were respected by essentially all the people who lived in the Judean kingdom in the lands that they controlled at the time. And if those prophets would essentially say, okay, you know, this is the person that you know we want to follow, or this is the person whose time is coming, then that's essentially the direction it would take. But there would still be, you know, a military presence there. There would still be, you know, a divine decree there. I mean, the reason why the prophets were so respected was because they were in essence conduits to the intent or the symbolism transmuted into human perception of what you know, Yahweh or the divine would convey to people. But then there were several Judean kings who, you know, who through their actions or through their inactions or through their greed ended up leading to, you know, some of the biggest downfalls or quandaries related to the Judean kingdoms. And as soon as there was infighting, and this can be applied to a lot of different nations. Like, this is one of the reasons why the Roman Empire was able to expand so far, was because they were so good at coming in to kingdoms or to local, you know, tribal conflicts or they would identify kingdoms in which there was infighting, and then they would back a certain side if that side came to them for help, or they would offer their assistance, and then they just wouldn't leave. And then that would essentially be a new vassal state or a new extension of the Roman Empire, and they would be like, all right, guys, now you kick up to us.
This land is mine because I feel like it. God, what kind of privilege is that?
Right. So, you know, and then if we talk about essentially I mean, from what I understand, the emperors of Rome seem to be, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, because I know that I'm not an expert, but they just seemed so removed from the general population. They were perceived to be essentially divine figures and divine in and of themselves, even though in retrospect and upon further study we know that they weren't, and we understand that there was just as much you know, possibility for an impetus for, you know, corruption and you know, intrigue as just about any other kingdom or empire or organization. And
so real quick, one of the points you made, it's very nuanced, and obviously they're not divine beings, but in terms of how they separated themselves from their subjects, it varied wildly in that some of them were more benign, where others were more Caligula-esque. Obviously, there's that, you know, Caligula is the epitome of the worst for a reason, but all Roman emperors were not Caligula, in that there were, well, again, the Roman Empire, let's not get it twisted, completely imperial, but it varied in intensity how much the emperor tried to articulate himself from the population as divine, or as completely subjugating.
so that also reminds me of the period of time in Europe of the enlightened despots, or the benevolent dictators, or people along those lines, where there are people who are aware of the benefits that they can bring to their people through the implementation of various technologies and the bestowing of various rights, or the evolution of a social structure in order to empower their people to essentially strengthen the economy and the the global standing of the nation that they represent. But ultimately, it seemed to be the despots themselves or the rulers themselves who made those decisions, and it seemed to be like a trend or a fad. And now, with the
Here, hold on, real quick, hold on. So this is where we also have to. We always hear about Marcus Aurelius, but apparently there were what is known as the 5 good emperors, which were basically philosopher emperors that were not.
Did they run in continuous?
Were Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antonius, Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. So it was not a bloodline, but these were emperors that reigned based on philosophical and ethical principles rather than iron-fisted despotism. So that's where we only hear about Marcus Aurelius because I think it's very difficult for Western and American history to be nuanced. But that's where we can't act as if they only had Marcus Aurelius and he was the only one because we were not taught our history well. And it makes, like, this is the Joe Rogan military industrial history interpretation that Americans often get too focused on, where it's like all the leaders were bad. Like, no, they actually had 5 good emperors, but we only hear about Caligula and Marcus Aurelius.
We hear about
because
Nero.
our teachers have problems, apparently.
We hear about Nero. He burned Rome and then bought all the land up and charged everyone more taxes to use their businesses. Nero is often mentioned whenever it's
him and Julius.
Yeah, like whenever there's like some profound economic growth, but really the economic growth was measured in the worst kind of way possible. It was just measured how much the Roman Empire itself owned. They basically found a way to buy up all the land in Rome proper. Crazy shit.
Conveniently, we only learn about the imperialist stuff, and it's framed as if they were making awesome decisions.
Yeah, of course.
like great real estate decisions,
right?
Yeah.
Mark Antony marrying Cleopatra was just a great decision for the expansion of the empire. He was fucking genius.
Like a great decision for the expansion of the empire without discussing the implications of what an expansion of the empire actually means for the people.
Or her age.
There, or her.
They won't even teach her age.
Right. Yeah.
And they're like, yes, this was a great period in Roman history. And it's like a fucking 7th or 8th grade high school history class where you're like,
well,
let's unpack this problem here.
Nero,
there's so many problems.
Nero exists during the age of the empire of ancient Rome. So that's like 27 BC to 476 AD. That's 503 years. He was like one of the early emperors, really, and everything before that was like the kingdom, and before the kingdom it was what was it? No, it was the Republic. Sorry, from 509 to 27 BC it was the Republic, and then from 753 to 509 BC that was the kingdom. So there's more pre-Roman Empire Roman history than there is empire. I mean, that stuff's kind of foggy, I guess. I don't know anything about that stuff.
Well, and that's funny you say that because in France they deal with a lot of that stuff because it directly ties to their history. So
yeah,
they have like Asterix and Obelix.
Oh, that.
Which is that's directly tied to that. But it's interesting how much more French people know about that period and Roman tribes and all that shit and Germanic tribes than Americans because obviously proximity. But it's just the history courses are just so much better at teaching that period, whereas ours are absolute shit. There's just no other way to describe it.
I mean, the kingdom.
Well, there's like this superhero mentality that a lot of our history instruction tends to take on. Like anything to make the way things are now in our country look so positive and look so great. And if we can educate people, or if we can educate our younger generations about what has come before and show how these decisions of these leaders or these individuals or these nations fighting each other led to the great things that we have today, because no one should question how great things are today, and that leads to the further success of our capitalist structure, which again is taught to be the best system that there is, then that makes it essentially easier to convey those ideas. And
Well,
that's why in a lot of social studies classes, you learn about um, the Revolutionary War, and it's basically it's a highly simplified um, overview of what led up to it. It was basically, okay, there was this disagreement about taxes, and then they started shooting at each other, and it was the British. And first, it was, okay, here's how the Kingdom of England was so successful, and now it's the British Empire. And this is how the British Empire was so successful. But all of a sudden, we have the British Empire fighting the American revolutionaries, and now for this couple of chapters, the British are going to be the enemies because we want America to come out on top in this narrative.
Well, it
And
has
then
to,
all of a
right?
sudden we have World War II, where everybody's friends again, and then we're fighting against a common enemy, and it doesn't even go into like why the United States got into World War II in the first place, or the timing of it all, or the
Or why they waited so long.
right. And I'll there was the provocation from the Japanese military and the Admiralty, and that was the that's typically what's taught to be the turning point. And it's a narrative that makes sense, but there's so much more that goes into it, and it always ends up being an America against the rest of the world kind of scenario that's broadly taught, as opposed to this is how the United States fits in with the global economy. It's basically taught like this is how America became the most powerful and best country in the world.
Yeah, and even when you frame it like that, um, the notion that America is somehow different than Britain is hilarious in that we were basically Little Britain at first, and just the craziest part. So it's not that America somehow had this unique identity from the very beginning. They were very much a colony of Britain for a while. So it's like interesting to see American revisionism to make this notion of this American exceptional ideal that God blesses America and nowhere else somehow, that this gets back to the same notion of de- uh, deity sanctioned authority over ruling, but now our king is the nation and the president represents the nation. So it's this like,
Oh, that's even
we
worse.
don't no longer have a king. Uncle Sam in his nebulous form is our king, but the president represents the king for 4 or 8 years at a time, and we just have to respect that king. So, I mean president. Sorry, I didn't mean to say respect that king. But this is like that subversion of
When
making people
president's
think
no
that they have a
longer
democracy when really we just have a periodic and temporary monarchy that is selected by an oligarchic group or plutocratic, whatever you want to call it. It's most certainly not a democracy, but we have not actually moved far away from the monarchy as our systems smoke and mirrors has wanted to make us believe. And that's why I get so frustrated when people try to reduce everything to voting, because that's how they are made to be passive. It's like, yeah, vote, do that, but there's four or 2 or 6 years in between votes, depending on which vote's happening, that you still need to do shit to make sure that you don't fall back into imperialism, or that you can actually get out of imperialism, because I don't think we ever got out of it necessarily. So
Well, so much of what you said ties into how the generation of a cultural ideal within this country has led to people making decisions that essentially have allowed their rights to be siphoned away by those who have achieved the status of the oligarchs over the past century and a half or so. And basically people starting off just being so desperate to have a house or to have food that they'll take a reasonable, like not even a reasonable increase in wages just to be able to achieve having food on the table, and then being introduced to interest rates that start off low but over time get higher and higher, and property prices and home prices that start off reasonable and in line with the wages that people make and their capacity to get loans. But even that was segregated, and it still is, and there's implicit racial bias in that. That's also something to discuss. But overall, wages have stagnated in comparison to people's ability to purchase things. So purchasing power has gone down, but the cultural ideal has essentially stayed the same. And what we're seeing now with the mass inability to pay off rent, purchase food, sustain a business, and people who are going into sustaining their own small businesses are now having to work with commercial landlords in order to identify whether or not they can even keep working out of that space. And then what does that mean? Like, are they essentially in a position now to abandon that cultural ideal, or are they going to try and keep selling things in a modified fashion that doesn't make them as much money? And then where does that leave them? So you have all of these people who were chasing this cultural ideal over a period of time, and that were indoctrinated to believe that cultural ideal was the pinnacle of what they could achieve, whereas it's really not. And then they're essentially getting left in the dust because they have less and less influence and less power.
Well, and you also nailed upon something where, as in the West, especially America, not unanimously in the West so much anymore, but it's very much made to seem as if our cultural pinnacle is in the past. And if people have kids, I don't understand how they could even remotely accept that paradigm. Like, if our cultural pinnacle is not in the future of the children, why even have kids then? If we've passed our pinnacle, then everybody should stop like breeding and figure out why we're regressing. But that's, people aren't even thinking about that aspect of how we view ourselves as a society, let alone the notion of reaching a stasis rather than looking to achieve constant progress and growth in a sustainable trajectory. Because that's also, there's no such thing as infinite growth, but when you're talking about sustainable and green movement forward as a culture, we have a long way ahead of us that we can keep going forward. So that's where it's not like on that front, we're not going to hit any roadblocks in the next fucking 2,000 years in that direction. But the capitalist fucking fossil fuel industry puts out a lot of propaganda to make you think that the pinnacle is in the past of electric discovery. It's like, oh, Ben Franklin and Thomas Edison. That's who we focus on. Can either of you name a genius electrical engineer that is between 30 and 35 years old, working right now, doing academic or field work without Googling it?
No.
That's not a personal friend. I know I can't, because society is not advertising those people as being important, as if we can't make another Thomas Edison or Nikola Tesla, as if those people only exist in our past. Einstein is only in the past. We often get news stories about child geniuses who are able to do some shit that we're like, yeah, great, good, clap, let's clap for them, but they haven't actually accomplished anything yet. So there's no actual reason we should be hearing about them. But we're not hearing about 30 to 35-year-old electrical engineers working on electrical efficiency of circuits and transformers and alternators, as if these people are not more important than LeBron James or uh, you know, whoever the fucking draft picks are for this year that a bunch of people have made fantasy football bets on. Why don't we have fantasy electrical engineering? Where we're like, oh, this person came out of fucking Stanford with the 4.0 GPA in physics. Man, they're gonna create some major shit. I'm gonna put $10 on this person, and we're betting on the market on who's gonna invent some shit. How is that not a thing? I'm like, the fact that we can bet on if somebody can put a ball through a hoop. We should be able to bet if somebody coming out of college is going to make something awesome in the next 5 years.
Well, we have to know whether or not they have any patents or if they're working on patents, because then basically the only way that we're allowed to bet on
We can bet on their patents.
Right, we can
bet
exactly
on that.
we can bet on that, and but essentially the only way, I mean, there can be a fantasy aspect of that, but one of the only ways that we can essentially bet on their success, also to their benefit directly as well, is through the capitalistic scheme of investing.
I mean, but if you go bet on a sports game, does the fucking player benefit from that right now in this system?
So I'm talking about separate.
That's what I know. I'm asking you because it's obviously rhetorical framing, but what I'm saying is you're 2 steps beyond where we're at now, because the people who get bet on don't even directly benefit because they can't even bet on themselves. Like in most cases, they're not even legally allowed to bet on themselves in most cases. So where you're talking about the person in the educational fantasy setting, well, we gotta convince these people who are willing to bet on all these sports things that the person they're betting on should benefit from it, because they don't believe that shit now.
Yeah, man, you can bet on. In the Philippines, you can bet on chickens right now online. I'm not saying anyone should go do this. I'm saying that we can bet on animals fighting each other in a different country because we have a computer and internet connections, but we can't bet on the future of ideas.
How ridiculous does that sound? And then when you see how much destructive shit all this technology is used for, whereas these ideas aren't new. The issue is that whenever somebody presents the ideas to do a good thing for the planet, somebody comes in and says, people won't buy that. And every time, every fucking meeting, that douchebag comes in and has the technology come get focused on fucking, come get focused on overeating, come get focused on escapist entertainment. And all that technology that could be used on building always gets directed by that one douchebag that comes into that fucking meeting. Because I've seen that douchebag in too many goddamn meetings. Every fucking time, and it's always a dude that comes in and says, people won't buy this. And then people start buying that dude's bullshit because he's really convincing. He's super confident in himself because he's always white. And he's always got all this fucking extra confidence that's undeserved. So it's one of these things where that dude ruins our capacity as a society to ever get the positive benefits of these tech, as if we can, like, the things we've discussed, it just takes minor tweaking for that tech to be what we're talking about. It doesn't take a major overhaul. These things, the technology already exists. It's just used to bet on disgusting and fucking despicable, destructive things. Yeah. That's all.
Well, a lot of the people who have that intellectual talent, capability, the foresight, the vision, they advance to high levels of education and erudition and qualification, and they may have awards and they may have recognitions. And then a lot of these large multinational companies or hedge funds or, like various arms manufacturers or technology firms or even social media companies just end up coming in and hiring them and not necessarily compensating them for coming up with ideas to benefit anything other than perpetuating the financial growth of those companies.
That's spot on, and it's basic. Hiring is a euphemistic term in that they're basically buying them off of the ethical market, and they're buying out their ethics and their morals is what it comes down to. Because once you have someone who's ethical and moral in the market making ethical and moral things, it makes all the unethical and immoral shit look horrible, and they can't have that. They can't have that shit roaming around, because then it makes people realize, like, oh, my Uber driver is really getting fucked. There's a way that the Uber driver doesn't get fucked this bad, and they'll do a background check, so I might not get fucking sexually assaulted. And then there's this element of, like, just because Uber put out a bunch of drivers without checking their backgrounds and then overcharges the fucking rider and then underpays the driver, people are like, oh, that's just how it is. Fuck the taxi companies. Uber's best, but that's the only way it can be done, because Uber bought out all of the competition, bought out all of the ethical apps that were the startups, and then all the ethical apps are no longer accessible on the internet because they're really good at scrubbing the internet.
Yeah, well, some of those networks are always going to fail because they never reach critical mass in terms of user base.
That's very true, but again, you
I'm
can
not
make a
disagreeing
tool,
with what
but
you're
reaching
saying.
critical mass is a war of attrition. You can have a tool that's there at the market at the perfect time,
Yeah.
but the users are skeptical, or the users are not trusting,
Yeah.
or whatever. There's
just
all
takes
of these
that
X
one
factors and
magazine
Y
article.
factors and Z factors that may make the perfect tool for what the market needs not hit the users at the right time. So it's always a war of attrition for any tool that hits the market that ends up being a cash flow burn test that kills 90% of organizations by year 5. That said, going into building something, most people who learn know this. So if they make it past that point and then they get bought out, that's a whole different thing. And that's where I'm saying it's like you see these.
Appears we have lost him.
No,
Oh,
I think
sorry.
he went on mute.
Yeah, sorry. That happens repeatedly in different industries, whether it's electrical or electric cars, blockchain, fucking smart TVs, smart refrigerators, you name it. If somebody built something ethical and was a startup and they made it past enough where they had a user base, the whole reason you haven't heard about them is because they got bought out. And that's what I'm saying. There's like all these things that a startup encounters that kill them. Cash flow, waiting on the market to catch up is one of the major ones, but having a successful product, make it past the user base, then get bought off the market is one of the other major ones as to why people still don't know about things that exist.
Well, also a lot of companies end up financing themselves with debt, and not just investment. Like, they can get a certain number of investors, or they can get underwriters, but ultimately, they can end up over leveraging themselves, and then they just disappear.
Well, that's just terrifying.
Yeah, there's an entire debt economy, and a lot of the times the business will be valued based off of how many. So a lot of people probably already know this, but a business is basically one of the factors going into valuing a business is not just how widespread its brand is, but also how many assets it possesses versus how many liabilities it has. So that's basically how much money it has versus how in debt is it. And if a company takes on a certain amount of debt by borrowing so that way they can develop their product. So if they take on like debt in order to finance R&D, because not all companies manage to do like Series A or Series B financing. Some companies have to finance by borrowing. And if they're not able to catch up by the time that's due, then they're not able to borrow more, and people are less likely to invest in them in the first place. So essentially the company will end up declaring bankruptcy. It will get bought over by another company, like Chris had mentioned, and then it'll just get sold off. So any reasonable technological advances or any patents or technology that the company had developed up until that point can essentially be sold to the highest bidder.
And this is something, again, it's not an accident that, what'll happen is you'll have somebody pitch an idea and all the potential series, this will be their family and friends round because they haven't reached Series A yet, will say, oh, you have a great idea. I'm not interested in investing right now, and force that company to end up taking out loans, watch them the entire time, then swoop in and buy it up. This is like a strategy that big companies implement and use so frequently that it's just a strategy now. It's not something that is unethical. It's just a strategy because so many companies don't operate by ethical guidelines that when you have unethical standards, that's just what people do and businesses do. So we're at a point where that sort of over-leveraged business that has a great idea but has to end up selling its IP to pay off its debt because they couldn't get the fucking funding, even though when they invented, if you can sell your IP at the end, that means somebody thought it was worth something, but they couldn't get the fucking investment at the beginning, so they had to borrow. Sounds like some bullshit to me. So that's why, again, this whole business environment is arbitrarily set up to squeeze people into positions where they have to take shit that they shouldn't take by people in positions of authority who just have capital and don't have the know-how. They don't have the tools. They don't have the skills. So they just put people in positions where they can squeeze them out of their fucking productivity, squeeze them out of their intellectual property, and then make it seem like they're fucking geniuses because they exploited somebody.
And a lot of the, for some of these startups, a lot of the senior members of the executive leadership team are people who are known by reputation as what can be called a serial entrepreneur, or somebody who has industry experience and a very significant Rolodex of contacts that would allow them to raise money. Because essentially the CEO has been relegated to the position, or maybe this was always the way it's been, but it is basically a person who represents the most confident aspects of the company's present and future, and basically uses anything negative in the past to subjects it to a certain level of spin, and then uses the more positive rebound or promises of future growth in order to continue to raise money for the organization. So you have people helming the organization, or if a company is in a position where you have a founder with IP, and then they want to raise money, but they're not able to get past a certain level, they may actually end up taking on people who will guide the company in a certain direction, that are just focused more on monetizing and raising money as opposed to making the technology broadly accessible.
They don't make money if they don't make money if the technology is broadly accessible. There has to be some kind
That's one of the paradoxes of that design element. Is like, if something is accessible and it's efficient, then it's not actually profitable, because profitability is exploitative almost 99% of the time. I don't know that off the top of my head, but what I'm saying is the entire premise of profit is extra overhead that goes into somebody's pocket that's not part of the cost of the actual thing. That means, by definition, profit is over anything over the actual cost of what is necessary. So that's where, again, it's like, if we had a society that only paid for what's necessary instead of trying to pay a profit element, it'd be a completely different conversation. But we are so busy worried about being profitable, which actually means going over what's necessary for the desired outcome, not actually meeting what's necessary for the desired outcome. So those are two completely different end goals, and we're given this framework as if profitability is synonymous with completion, whereas profitability is beyond completion.
So think of this particular paradigm. We're taught to measure the success of our country based off of how strong the stock market is, or how well all of these American industries are doing, without taking into account that a lot of these companies pay very little in taxes. And if the United States government truly isn't intimately intertwined with corporate interests and lobbyists, then why is that metric, even relied upon in the first place? So we're kind of sold this idea by these advertising machines, because of, as you mentioned, there's that profitability model. So all of these companies have to have advertising and marketing, and an indication is, and people spreading the message as to why this particular product or this particular idea is better than previous ideas, because otherwise people, are they simply, the question is, how good are people at finding out new information or seeking out new potential treatments, or do they have to be consistently reminded of something that's changing, and is the ad machine, and the marketing machine really necessary? Like how many new iterations of a cheeseburger do we really need? And if we're constantly reinventing the fast food cheeseburger process, does that mean that cheeseburgers are really that necessary to the success of the American, economy, or are we just trying to sell meat to people and make sure that they just keep eating this, cheap processed food?
They had to. That was demonstrated during some of the meat packing plant shutdowns, those facilities where they had COVID outbreaks. And then they would find these websites would be popping up all over the place where it was some farmer who has a bunch of cattle that they need to ship off to get processed, and so they can get paid, because all of a sudden their orders were no longer people weren't trying to fill those orders with their product. And so there's a huge supply chain issue because they had all this meat, but the people that were supposed to come get it to process it in their giant meat plants they wouldn't come and get it because they just weren't processing meat.
So that also shows how the agrarian or the agricultural industry or the farmers are put in this position where they either are overproducing, and I'm not sure what the profit margins are in the agricultural sector, but they're either overproducing or they're underproducing. And if anything happens
It's a fragile economy.
The consumer side, then they're in a terrible position, and our agricultural industry ends up suffering.
I think that's just a good model for a lot of industries. Well, I like to rag on the middleman industry that's just buying a product and having it privately labeled and then reselling it. I know that's been a fine business model for a little while, but it clearly hasn't quite held up as well as people would have hoped. It turns out that the big corporations who have deep pockets are best able to weather these kinds of supply chain issues. I think that there are a lot of economies that have been based upon maintaining and sustaining a certain rate of consumption, and I think that's also that's a big problem, because it's a culture that exists that just consumes. That's its whole point. That's the thing that we can't get around, is that how are we supposed to re-educate an entire generation of people, or multiple generations of people all at once, that like, hey, we don't actually have to do things this way. But then certain industries are gonna shrink. Certain types of jobs are gonna disappear, and then we have to come up with new economies. But that shouldn't be hard. We've built new economies before. It's just a matter of actually figuring out what people need.
Well, there are estimations that, so one of the issues with a heavily consumeristic economy is that once people stop consuming, then the businesses that rely upon providing consumer products, and small businesses, let's just say specifically for the sake of this discussion, start to fail because they're in danger of essentially closing because they no longer have clientele, but also they don't have, there's a disruption in their supply chain, so they don't really necessarily have anything to provide their clientele to consume. But then the people employed by those businesses who also rely on the consumer industry aren't able to make whatever salaries, and a lot of salary people are highly underpaid. There's been a lot of wage stagnation, so there are people who are not only in the commercial real estate space but in the residential real estate space who are in danger of getting evicted. And there are projections that there will be like nearly 30 million people who are going to be homeless after some of the stays on eviction are lifted in the coming months. So not only do we have to think about reevaluating the structure of the economy for the sake of changing the consumeristic aspect of it, because this is what it leads to, as we've seen in real time. This is a real world model of how unstable the consumer capitalistic structured economy is. But we need to think about how to restructure an economy, and even perhaps the government, in a way that houses people who need housing, or people who are in danger of losing their housing by the millions.
Yeah, I think there's something like 20 million unoccupied vacant homes in America. So math works pretty well.
Yeah, but
let me look it up real quick, you guys.
The banks need to get their slice of that pie of those empty houses that they own that they can't get anyone into because the land, like the tax is too high, or the house is valued too high, but even though the bank is selling it for such a low price, some of those houses are traps.
Well, there's that, and there's also the difference between how certain commercial renters are being treated versus how residential renters are being treated, or people with mortgages are being treated.
Yeah.
In Boston, there are some stories coming out in the news about small businesses that are working or trying to negotiate with their landlords about how they're going to be able to pay their rent. And some of the landlords are large-scale commercial real estate organizations in and of themselves, and they're saying, okay, maybe you're not able to pay your full rent this month. Can you pay a half? Can you pay a quarter? And they talk about it. But when you see residential real estate, or when you see landlords for like apartments and stuff like that, you never hear anything like that in regards to people actually keeping their homes. You never hear, oh, look, can I work it out with you? Can you pay half? Can you pay a quarter? They're not even given the option. It's not even suggested. It's basically like, oh, rent's going to be due in full by the end of this month, or you're going to be evicted, or there's going to be a compounded fee based off of how long you've gone without paying your rent due to the lifting of this stay of eviction. So the sheriffs are already lined up to kick people out of their homes.
Yeah, that's their job.
People with commercial real estate leases are being given a bit of a break.
So real quick, in 2017 there were approximately 1.5 million vacant homes, but then it jumped up to 17 million in 2018. U.S. Census Bureau released its American Community Survey for 2018, and they found over 17 million vacant. So they were trying to hide that shit in 2017, and then that shit came out in 2018. So now what I think is happening is there are conspiracy people who are like, oh, they just manufactured COVID to cover up the problems that were happening. They didn't manufacture shit. They didn't. Let's dead that notion that they can manufacture anything. First off, these people can't find their own fucking assholes, let alone manufacture a virus that's gonna kill people. They can stumble upon some shit. They can't. They're not that smart. So second, yes, it definitely seems as if there was some attempt to hide the poverty problem in America that can no longer be hidden, that now the unemployment numbers are actually starting to be seemingly more accurate with what they were lined up with before, because Yes, a lot more people are reporting unemployment with COVID, but there were unemployed people that were not seemingly getting picked up before that now seem to be getting picked up by the system. They're like, oh yeah, we can take you in now because we were waiting for a scapegoat. But at the same time, then they're going to come back and tell you we need to profit off of the recovery instead of just taking these fucking 17 million homes and putting some of the 17 million unemployed people or 30 million unemployed people in those homes and then having people refurbish those homes as an employment plan for America where the tax cut dollars cover that and then build 13 million new homes for the 30 million unemployed people to keep them in. So there's all these things that we could be doing to put people back to work, protect unemployed people from being homeless, and in the process, start to rebuild our infrastructure to not be so dependent on outsourcing. But we're doing none of that. We are doing absolutely none of that right now as a country. So when we're looking at going right back into outsourcing, right back into our supply chain being brought in by slave labor in some country we can't see, who then they're going to tell us is communist, even though they're using slaves and not actually working for the people. China's communist in name only. They're imperialist as fuck, generally. Yeah, there's a lot of people that benefit from the state. There's a lot of people over there that get exploited the same, if not worse, than here. So let's not point at their government and let's not absolve our government because there's a lot of shit that we need to fix, but obviously none of it can be done for profit. We can't do anything for profit anymore. Profit fucking destroys our society. It does not help. We need to do the cost of whatever needs to get done and not a goddamn dime more. That's the only way to not corrupt it. If you just stick to the cost. Because once you start talking about, well, how can we make extra money? How can we, I can make 10%, you can make 5%, that's only 15%. Well, we need to compensate the fucking person who's hosting the fucking sale. That's 3%. Now you're at 18%. Well, there's the people who are going to take care of the cash transfer. They get 1%. Now you're 19%. Well, the government needs taxes. Well, that's 7%. Now you're 26%. And all of a sudden, you're paying 26% extra than the actual cost because people decided we need extra on top of the cost. Because that for whatever reason, that math doesn't sound like it's going to end up with problems.
Well, you're also talking about the country that basically promulgated subprime mortgage crisis, where people by the thousands were basically put into a position to
that's where all those empty houses come from
of debt, and be unable to sell their homes or basically lose out on their mortgages because the housing bubble popped.
In the process, the companies that gave those people the loans got bailouts while those people lost their fucking houses.
Right. So this is an industry that is not necessarily inclined to just, make non-profit related decisions. They're more inclined to paint the rosiest picture possible. I mean, with wages staying what they are, and I know I keep going back to wages, but with wages staying what they are over the past decade compared to say the top 3 most expensive cities in the United States, and we're just talking about rent. The median rent for a 1-bedroom in Boston, Massachusetts is over $3,000 a month. And wages,
my God.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, 1 bedroom. And that's like maybe in a building that has certain amenities to it, and hopefully it has heat and hot water, and maybe an in-unit washer dryer. Like you can hopefully get like a 1-bedroom with an in-unit washer dryer and maybe a dishwasher with utilities included, and no pets allowed for $1,800, $1,900 a month. And that's in and around the greater Boston area, and the prices just keep going up. I mean, over the past it's been like a 20% increase, and then in the past decade, and then in 1 year, I think last year, home prices or rental prices went up 6.6%. But again, like wages don't necessarily go up in concert. So you have a lot of people. Like I know people who it was a married couple and they wanted a home, they bought a home, but in order to even finance living there, they got roommates in their home, like another married couple. So you have like two married couples living in a home, and then you have to basically be reliant upon this other couple to keep their jobs, stay able to pay for their end. Otherwise, you're going to lose out. And like, what if you have a major event, a major medical event in your family? Hopefully not, but the average person in America between the ages of like 25 and like 35 on average has like less than $8,000 in savings. So if they have like a medical bill that they have to pay, that immediately cuts into their savings. And what if they have to pay for car payments or things like that, or catch up, or if they're not able to work. And not all jobs offer disability insurance, but if they do, you don't often have the amount of the disability insurance in the short term or even the long term cover for how much your regular expenses are going to be in such an expensive area. So it's a tightrope walk in these expensive cities, and that's why you have that's why it's such a downer to see people focusing on these metrics for success that they create for themselves. Like, I have to be completely financially independent, whereas they were never going to be financially independent unless they had help or scholarships or their families assisted them financially in some way. But like it's such a rare occurrence, you know what I mean? And if some condos around Boston, they can go for millions of dollars essentially for like a 2-bedroom condo. So if you have people buying into those things or going into debt in order to afford those things, and then all of a sudden have this economic collapse, like, what is that going to do? And then
Isn't that just a bigger version of Airbnb failure?
basically, and then on top of that, you have situations where home prices go up because people stop selling their homes because fewer people are buying. So home prices end up going up by like 4.55% over the course of 4 months because there are fewer properties available. So then people end up banking on it either way. So it's really a weird situation. But there are people who are talking about a precipitous drop in home prices in these areas, especially because so many of these rental residences and these landlords that rent out residences are dependent on the economy, that the economic influx of student dollars and the money that students end up spending, because they end up signing leases for like 2 or 3 people or one person, depending on how much financial assistance they're getting, and then they end up filling up all these units. But if all these units are going to be empty, and they're going to be empty for months on end, then these landlords are going to have to essentially face a reckoning. But yeah, it's pretty expensive. Where they say it's expensive, it's ridiculously expensive.
Yeah, that just seems insane.
So in the past couple of weeks, I just searched to see if Airbnb had any major movements. So apparently in Ireland, the government is tired, and the people, I guess, are tired of the Airbnb effect on the rental properties. So the government is buying up all the Airbnb properties. And then Airbnb is also implementing rules to prevent anybody under the age of 25 from renting out an entire property, so they don't do unauthorized house parties, where it's like and then if you think about the fact that Airbnb uses third-party cleaning that's likely irregular, Airbnb is not going to be the most sanitary option in this summer for anybody. Like, they were only going to be able to get low risk travelers who were looking to go fucking party and find some open bars where they could like get close to people that were super dangerous. That Airbnb, the 25 under 25 people are the only ones that are probably going to use this shit, because anybody that can afford a nice hotel isn't going to use Airbnb this year because this shit is gross.
Oh.
Ain't no fucking way I'm relying on the person who owns the house to clean the fucking bedroom like somebody who's getting paid, like, and their job depends on it to do it. That's not going to be the same shit.
Yeah.
Not with Airbnb, because those people are trying to exploit you.
Yeah.
They don't actually care about you having a good time. They want you to rate them nice, but they're going to hope your standards aren't that good, and you're going to be like, oh, I didn't notice all this hair on the floor. I didn't notice these fucking unemptied trash cans. Like, yeah, no, that Airbnb is like bunking with somebody for the weekend, where
It's
before
hanging out.
COVID-19, hell yeah, I'd take that shit for $100 discount if I'm in San Francisco. But now, not on any planet. Not on any fucking planet.
Maybe a sterilized spaceship.
Nope, not even, because I would assume that they would lie about the sterilization just to get my money, because that's what they do. Not buying it, not again.
Isn't that the quandary of this whole, like, this service is kind of a service industry where the provider is the middleman, and they have to put themselves in some kind of financial risk to participate in the system. Like with Lyft or Uber, you have to have a car of a certain vintage or newer, and then with Airbnb, like it's dependent on a number of factors, and even the ones where it's like grocery delivery or food delivery, there's so much there. A corporation can absorb the costs of operating and maintaining their fleet of vehicles, but they also have the benefit of like an entire fleet of vehicles, and so they can buy in bulk, or they can maintain a service department that exists completely just to maintain those vehicles. But putting that risk onto the owner operator of a vehicle, or the owner maintainer superintendent of an Airbnb property, that's like a magnified version of the risk that they have to that they experience as a result. It's really kind of dirty.
You've nailed upon something that the way it's been framed is in terms of risk and monetary risk only, because then that dehumanizes the people who are then actually taking on the risk as the drivers who are on the road with the semis potentially dying. Because then what you find out is, in a lot of these big cities, it'll be a couple of people who own a shitload of the Uber fleet, and a lot of the people driving are immigrants trying to pay their, they'll get a car in the process, and it's like, oh, that sounds awesome, like a trade-off. Well, then you find out they're getting underpaid in a way that when they have to put in, 50, 70 hours a week driving the car, and then they don't actually end up getting the car in the long term, because they'd have to do it for like three or 4 years or something to actually pay it off, and a lot of them don't make it to that end. Then you realize it's just exploiting people who are in a vulnerable situation with a false promise, but that shit never gets told on the other side. You have to go ride with enough Uber drivers to hear that shit, because they sign enough NDAs, and enough people within their organization have signed NDAs, that you're never going to hear that side of the story from anyone who's ever gotten $1 from Uber, lest they will get sued into poverty.
Well, I know one guy who bought a really nice car. He bought an all-wheel drive BMW, and he was doing Lyft Premium or Uber Black, or whatever their prestige brand is called. And he was getting hired to drive 5 hours. On the highway, stop and wait for a couple hours, then drive back to Chicago, stuff like that. And express pickup for the airport, drop off, pick up from the airport, that kind of stuff, but in a fancy car. And then eventually he's upgraded to an Audi, some really fancy, like a Q7 or something. and I think he's still doing the like the food delivery, that kind of stuff. But I don't think he's delivering people anymore. So I wonder how far that kind of economy works out. Because it has to be during peak utilization. Otherwise, that kind of vehicle is overkill.
Well, because again, do you know for sure that he owns it? Because he might still be under contract and just doesn't want to come be open about it.
Yeah.
Where I don't know how long he's had it, but that's what I'm saying. In that the deals that they sign, a lot of times end up, unless he's been able to make enough, which he may have. But a lot of times the deals they sign end up putting them in these bonding situations where they're driving a nice car, but they're in it 60 hours a week driving someone else, and they don't actually get to use it for themselves.
Yeah.
And it's like, however many years deep, he's still delivering food in it. And it's like, I did delivery driving at some point, and I've been in a spot where I took a fucking Uber from Chicago to Bloomington. So I know both sides of that equation, where what ends up happening is when you're the driver, they don't talk about the cost of putting all that stress on your car. Because I've been a delivery driver where my car fucking broke down in the middle of a delivery and wouldn't start back up. And I'm like, well, shit, now I'm $300 down because I got to get this shit towed, and I don't know how much it's going to cost to fix it, and I got to get these people their food. And I don't know what the fuck to do right now because it's fucking 5 o'clock and I'm in the middle of traffic and this dude's honking at me. So there's this like, nobody talks about that shit when they're doing the delivery driving, because that's the like worst of the worst, in that when you're the Uber driver or the person who's signed the contract for the car, it's like, yeah, you got the BMW, but you don't talk about that fucking 5-hour shit where they didn't tip.
I've ridden with some ride shares, and like one of the, if it's a nicer vehicle, one of the things I always ask the driver is, what's the maintenance look like on this vehicle? Like, because I know that there are certain makes that require regularly serviced like tires or tire replacements every so many miles, and if they're putting that many miles on their vehicle and they're picking up that many people and doing that many drop-offs or runs, then that would probably accelerate the process.
Every vehicle manufacturer has a standard wear cycle, like a scheduled interval for maintenance, and they all have a severe use schedule, where that's like you're driving beyond a certain number, whatever the standard interval is. If you're driving it like every day and commuting every day, you wouldn't use the standard maintenance schedule. You'd use the severe usage maintenance schedule.
So then it's very likely that these people are using the severe.
They would have to if they're driving it like that.
Using the severe usage schedule, and these components that they're replacing, or these parts that they're replacing for their vehicle, it's not inexpensive. It's actually rather expensive. I'm not sure how they're able to make those adjustments or pay for that maintenance. Like, are they allowed to write it off, or do they have to pay for it out of their profits?
You have to have it first to be able to write it off. That's the fucking shit about write-offs, that it sounds great for businesses, but if you're a small person or individual LLC, whatever, sole proprietorship, you have to have that money to be able to write it off. And then it becomes this quandary of like, yeah, if somebody has a $500, $600 car repair and they don't have that $600, not only can they not write that off, now they're stuck in a lease for something they need to work to make money to pay off that lease. Oof. That then they don't have the money to make work again, and then they get it repossessed, and then the person who was on like leasing it to them gets it back with, all they have to do is then replace that part, and then they own the shit. It's like a really fucked up system.
Yeah. Oh, that just sounds predatory as fuck.
It's super predatory. It's the same shit with predatory subprime mortgage lending. It happened with homes, and it's happening with vehicles. But then the people, they're basically indentured servants that are making money for Uber in the process.
Yeah, and then they assume the debt of the loan no matter what, so they get the credit hit if something
Yep.
goes wrong. And
Yep.
that's
It's
that's what
super
happens
predatory.
in the housing industry with people who try to get into the Airbnb economy, and then next thing you know, they have to sell their house because no one's staying there. And that their whole business model relies on somebody renting it at least like 2 or 3 nights a week or something like that.
It sounds so good when you need money, but when you're not in a desperate situation, you can sit back and analyze like the pros and the cons of it. Whether it's like Airbnb or Uber, because when you're talking about Airbnb, yeah, property maintenance. The property maintenance is going to be the same. It's the same type of shit. Yeah, you get a whole bunch of people, or you're going to have to pay to clean after every time. You're going to have to pay if somebody breaks some shit every time. So there's all these things about maintenance that don't get discussed in terms of starting small, uh, being a small business that end up being a reason as to why small businesses exploit their employees almost even worse than big businesses a lot of time. So then mom and pop shops, I don't even want to defend them because of the way that they have to exist. They end up exploiting people a lot, almost more than the big name companies a lot of times. So then it's like, no, go into business for yourself. Don't be working for somebody else on a small or big level because they're just trying to exploit you. I don't care what they say, if they give you a Christmas present or not. If they're your boss and they're not your family, they're exploiting you is what it comes down to in this country. Because that's the only way they can survive. This economy demands you exploit something or someone to survive because of how shitty and inefficient it is, and how if you start making too much money, then they start taxing you and taking money because you made it, even though they didn't fucking help you. What are you gonna do with it? Go bomb somebody?
Can't you put it into education? No.
Nope.
We've got to buy a Lamborghini
No.
for this police department in LA.
Can't you put an infrastructure? No. We need a fucking MRAP.
Oh God. Stupid.
This police department needs an armored vehicle. No, we're taking all that profit you just made that we didn't help you make and putting it in an armored vehicle to protect us from you because you know what we're doing is fucked up and you might start tearing down our buildings. Is what that comes down to. That's where we're at.
Oh, there's still time to sell the Bearcat. They can still sell that fucking thing. They
To
can.
who though?
It doesn't matter.
Who needs that shit?
They'll
Who needs a Bearcat?
Wait, doesn't Alex Jones have a Bearcat? I think he has a Bearcat.
Sell all the Bearcats to Alex Jones. Yes.
Well,
And his followers.
You can raffle them off.
Yeah.
I bet those things get like 6 miles per gallon or something dumb.
Oh my god. Yeah.
I mean, they're like actual armored personnel carriers. They're not just
Yep.
armor plates that get added to the side. They're like hardcore. I remember watching videos of, I guess they were riots at that point in Baltimore, and I just, or was it Baltimore? No, it was Delaware. And one of my buddies said that he saw this thing. It was like a Hummer, and I said I didn't see any Hummers. He's like, no, it's right there. Look at the screen. And I said, oh, that's a Bearcat. You know, it's like, holy shit, what the hell is that? And I sent him a link to it, and it's one of those things where you realize these machines are crazy. They can do things that off-road vehicles can do while carrying armor. They're just insane. And I can't understand any real reason for them to exist other than to intimidate people. I feel like that's the kind of vehicle you could drive into a building, take out a wall, then back out, and then everything on the vehicle would be fine.
Well, if you're a sole business proprietor, a business owner, and you own a fleet of Bearcats, then perhaps you can write all of those off. Maybe we shouldn't give them all away. We'll find another use. We'll just dismantle them.
These things
sell
shouldn't
them
be
off piece by piece, melt them down, turn them into something else.
Yeah.
But just real quick about, because we were talking about what the government tends to do with our income. looking at the Congressional Budget Office use of revenues in fiscal year 2019, they had $1.2 trillion in payroll taxes and $1.7 trillion in individual income taxes. And essentially they had $4.4 trillion in outlays. So that's essentially what is spending. So they have to spend 2.7 trillion, and then they have 1.3 trillion at their discretion. So they can essentially fund their discretionary spending, and it doesn't indicate based off of this particular graphic that they provided, but if I'm reading this correctly, they can almost fund, or they can actually more than fund their discretionary spending based off of individual income taxes that they collect from the citizens of the United States.
Those motherfuckers. God. And they need more money all the time, right? They always need more money.
Well, yeah, I mean, their revenues for 2019 were less than their outlays, so they were obviously basically at a spending deficit.
Yeah.
I feel like these people heard some weird, fucked up version of the grasshopper and the ant, where the ants like stockpiled a bunch of money and not supplies. They're like, yes, the ants survived because it had money, and the grasshopper had to come and borrow money, and that's how the grasshopper survived the next winter, because all the ants had the money. Because they bought the supplies. It's like, how do they come to this conclusion of stockpiling all of this money instead of the things that money is meant to buy? It's a really insane endpoint for capitalism, where I'm just like, okay, obviously this is on a downward slide, but the people who are in a position of media influence are obviously pro-capitalism, so they're not going to acknowledge it. But everybody can see it. This is not the A team we're playing with anymore. This is clearly the C and the D team. They're fucking working with what they have, burning it up, not doing anything beneficial, and it's just a matter of time before their little brush fire burns out, and then we can move on to a new system of society. Obviously, capitalism's dying. I don't know how else to say it. Capitalism is 100% on the way out the door. Anybody who has two fucking brain cells to rub together can see that shit.
Well, they have to be paying attention first.
Right. Obviously a lot of Americans only have one brain cell, and it's like, it needs some shocking, but we're at a point where, again, it's like, if you're looking at capitalism even remotely objectively, you're like, yeah, 99% of it's broken, so yeah, maybe we can keep 1% of capitalism.
I'm pretty sure I read recently that there's some correlation between people who have problems with social distancing and low intelligence.
Yeah, it was their working memory is not. And this gets back to the, we had a previous discussion on the podcast about short-term versus long-term memory. Ultimately, they're not able to hold multiple arguments in their working memory at the same time. So they can't harbor too much conflicting information. And that's where, when the way that would play out is if you have two pieces of data that came out in the same week. One is the CDC saying masks work, and then the other one is the CDC saying masks work some of the time. The person with higher intelligence is going to be able to reconcile those two pieces of information, whereas the person with lower working memory span and also lower intelligence quotient is not going to be able to as easily reconcile those two pieces of information, because they simply can't hold that information in their working memory that long. So they're like, oh, I'm just going to hold on to this one thought. This thought does me good because I can't think about this other thought for too long, because that hurts my brain. Hurts my thinking machine. God damn it, I'm not going to wear a mask. I'm masculine. That's mask enough for me. I got my mask. It's not toxic. So those people are, again, the ones where it's like, obviously they don't actually understand economics, but they are convinced that this terrible approach to mathematics that we've been presented, that everyone needs to stockpile money, is a good way to approach societal infrastructure building.
Well, let's look at who's perpetuating that particular image. I mean, we have the Department of Education, and we have
They're continuously
the distribution
more
and
with less.
sort of a spreading of the ideas from the top to the bottom. But if we're looking at the organization or the government that's sharing that kind of ideology or perpetuating it or allowing it to perpetuate, it's an organization that's essentially for most of from 1970 to 2019, there's only been one instance in which there was a federal surplus, and now we're perhaps even at a greater deficit than we were before that, and that the amount of federal debt held by the public from 1970 to 2019 has gone from, so it's the percentage of gross domestic product. So it's gone from 27.1% in 1970 to 79.2% in 2019. So obviously there's something that's, particularly unprofitable, I suppose, about that particular approach, or whatever approach that's been implemented ever since.
It's the boardroom. I can tell you exactly what it is.
Boardroom.
The executives and the boardroom, because I don't know if anybody's seen the chart floating around lately with the productivity in America versus the actual compensation that workers get from their productivity, but that motherfucker does not align, and the extra productivity is going directly into the executives and the board of directors' pockets, and their golden parachutes and all their subsidies into research and development that comes out of the taxpayers' pockets and then goes right back into the company's pockets on the other side. So yeah, I can tell you that shit right there, because they've done research, and the compensation of executives has gone up something, I think it's like 400. The average, I want to say, is like something like 400% on the low end, whereas the average compensation of the worker over the last, 30 years has gone up, I think, like 12%. And in some cases where we're talking about teachers, it's like, I think, stagnated and really not gone anywhere at all. Because when you have to take into account inflation. That's another thing that they don't discuss, is inflation. How's the dollar doing? How's the dollar doing today? Probably not good, because they tied our dollar to our productivity. And when you ship our productivity overseas, then the productivity that was once tied to our dollar is now actually overseas, and it's a bunch of smoke and mirrors. So whether it's inflation, the outsourcing of productivity and production to multiple countries, and not, it's not just one, it's not just China. It's India, it's Taiwan, it's Thailand, it's Vietnam, Korea. There's all these places that our productivity has been outsourced to, that now that we need to rebuild our infrastructure, they're trying to lean on those same outsourced production methods, as if that's not just going to lead to more national security vulnerability. Because we're super vulnerable right now as a nation. I don't know if people have gone on job searches, but you have a bunch, like, this is not hyperbole. You have state-sponsored fake job ads that are then vectors into compromising people's social security numbers and identities, happening happening constantly on all these job networks. So if you're listening, if the job sounds too good to be true, it's probably Russia or China. So don't take it. Don't apply. Don't respond to unsolicited job offers that sound too good to be true, because that shit's probably Russia or China or North Korea right now, because our economy, our job situation is a national security threat in that I've seen the attacks happening. I've seen the vectors being exploited. This is not the potential. This is already going down. But they're just not going to say it, because then that stresses the need for universal basic income, because that's really the only way to address that vector. Universal basic income is the only thing that's going to save America right now. In all seriousness.
This whole time, Andrew Yang was right. We just weren't listening.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, sorry, go ahead, Tim.
No, I was just going to say, it's like, he was pushing for something that was way ahead of the curve. And I don't even think he was thinking in terms of pandemic.
No, he wasn't, because then what ended up happening is once he got past his campaign and started getting in the machine, he started bullshitting on his policies too. So again, it's like, I think he had some good ideas, but I don't even think Andrew Yang
knew what they were.
Yeah, I don't think his math took into account the real situation on the ground. And I think he was playing with the bullshit numbers that he's been given by the companies to not offend them, so he would get hired by CNN after, or hired by wherever the fuck hired him. Because he immediately went into that corporate machine. Yeah, he still talks about UBI, but Andrew Yang does not need to be an official to make a fucking change. The fact that he's not making a change right now, he sold the fuck out immediately. Same shit with Bernie. Both of those motherfuckers sold out. I have no problem calling them sellouts. Yeah, they had some great concepts and great ideas. But right now, the fuck are they doing? The fuck are either one of them doing? Nothing.
None of them are in the news. Biden is barely in the news.
Yep. Biden, for all we know, Biden is just weakened at Bernie's, like being weakened at Bernie right now. As little as we're seeing him, as much as his tweets sound like they're coming from some intern, I don't buy for a second that he's sitting there with his Twitter fingers hot. Biden ain't tweeting.
Oh, surely he uses a computer still for Twitter.
Nah, hell no. Biden, you think Biden can use a computer either?
I mean, no.
Let me ask you.
No.
Let me ask you. If Joe Biden was sat in front of a computer, how long do you think it would take him to find his mobile bank information? Joe Biden. What is he, 72? 77? I don't know. Over 70? 70? I don't know. It's at least 70. I know he's not in his 60s. But again, we're talking about a 70-year-old man. Do you really think he's seated in front of a computer for a significant time with his arthritis?
He's 77.
Yeah. So the oldest guess I took, the oldest one, he's pushing 80 now. Can Joe Biden sit in front of a machine and not have carpal tunnel hit in like 3 seconds? I don't know. I don't think so. I'm not trying to be ageist, but I'm just saying, let's be real. Is a 77-year-old man tech savvy?
Maybe, if they've been doing it this whole time.
Maybe. John McAfee, I think, is like 74, I want to say. So that's what a tech savvy 74-year-old looks like in 2020. He's also a psychopath, obviously. But that's what a tech savvy 70-something-year-old looks like. How old is he, Tian?
74.
Is he 74?
Yeah, he is.
My guesses are on point today. But yeah, John McAfee is a tech savvy 74-year-old man. Joe Biden, on the other hand, I don't know. I don't know. And this is not, again, not to hate on older people, not to hate on Joe Biden. This is merely saying, where the fuck is Joe Biden? Where the fuck is Bernie Sanders? Where the fuck is Andrew Yang? Because right now, we need leadership, we need action, and these motherfuckers are in the ivory tower talking about what they could do, what they can do, what they will do, instead of just fucking doing it. I don't need that shit. I don't need any more of that shit in my life. I don't think anybody else really does either. That's what a president does. Tells us for fucking a year what they're gonna do instead of just doing it. You don't need to wait for Trump to get out of office, start making a change on the ground. Joe Biden could be doing shit right the fuck now.
Yeah.
He just want to talk though.
So,
he just wants to talk.
So when I searched for tech-savvy septuagenarians, I got a bunch of articles that are like how to become tech-savvy and tech-savvy in 10 easy steps, or tech-savvy seniors in 10 days. And so I expanded who are tech-savvy 70-year-olds, and it's the same list. There's like no people. There's no box to the side in the Google search that has pictures of people with names.
I was just talking about the hypocrisy earlier within our leadership, people saying things and talking about what they want to do but not actually doing it, saying that they listen to the people that support them with their votes but actually moving in a completely different direction. I mean, one of the major arguments against universal basic income, and it's actually full of fallacies, is that it will encourage people to stop working, and therefore there will be less taxable income. But the people who typically argue against universal basic income are people who would also argue against having more taxes or want fewer taxes, or perhaps don't even pay taxes to begin with. So there's an utter hypocrisy involved in that particular discussion as well.
Well, yeah, and then it's like we always hear about what motivates people from economists and business owners, but never the people that do the things. And that's the whole reason I started off this episode talking about why when I am helping a differently abled or elderly person, I don't want to get paid for that shit. But some business asshole will sit there and tell you, I want to get paid as much as possible. No, fuck that. I want to help that person. That's why I'm there. I just have the skill. The person who sends me there, they have the fucking infrastructure and the platform to connect me to the person that needs me. And that's where it's the same shit. It could be as easy as 911. If somebody needs help, they could just call it, oh, I need help building this fucking dresser. Oh, I need help setting up this television. Oh, I need help solving why my cable box isn't reading. Oh, you're not charging me $70? The government pays for it? Awesome, I'll see you here shortly. That's a whole different future as made out to be some socialist, communist or whatever, bad dystopia, as if that's not fucking awesome. The notion that you can just call up somebody who's already compensated to help you so you don't have to worry about exchanging money to get done what you need done, somehow that's meant to be a dystopia in this country. It just sounds absurd. Even saying that scenario is somehow dystopian. People get what they need taken care of. The person doing it gets compensated exactly how much it costs. Fair, no trade necessary between the two people to make the shit awkward. We don't have to monetize the exchange. I needed help. You helped me. I don't have to give you money and make you feel like a prostitute now because it's already taken care of. Now we can just talk to each other like human beings. Like, oh, this person's in need of assistance? I can offer you assistance. I'm no longer a whore. It's that easy. But I guess everything needs to be turned into a monetized exchange for the sake of profit.
Exceptional Radio.
Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.